we were trying to understand some lessons, some historical context of the journeys of Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And there are three distinct journeys that took place. And last week we did the journey that he took towards the west. And it was mentioned in the Quran. Surah Al-Kahf is the surah that it is mentioned in. And there are other stories mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf as well. Today, the journey that we will be dealing with is the Eastern journey, and plus some of the historical confusions that have taken place and that historians have created. When I say historians, we're not talking about Islamic historians or Muslim historians. We're talking about the Greek historians. And in order to basically claim Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu into their religion. Because he is such an extraordinary personality in the history, and such a personality which is basically considered as sacred in Judaism, even in Christianity and in Islam as well. So obviously, whenever such things happen, there is always a fight as to who actually he was. Every group is going to go and claim that this person is ours. Just like it happened in the Ghazwa, the trench, the Khandaq, that when Salman Farsi radiallahu ta'ala anhu, because he was a very strong man, and he has been working very hard in the gardens of the Jews to plant the date palms. When it came to dig the trench to save the city of Medina and the Muslims from the kuffar, from the people from Quraysh who were trying to overwhelm the Muslims, Salman radiallahu ta'ala, although he was Persian, and so he was the one who was digging the most in the entire group of Muslims. So everyone was trying to claim Salman radiallahu ta'ala as somebody was saying, oh, he is an Ausi, he's from the tribe of Aus. Somebody was saying, oh, no, he is, he is from our tribe. No, he's from our tribe. And that's when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Salman is from my Ahl Bayt. And there are different variations of that. But so whenever there is such a personality, everyone tries to claim that, oh, this is from us, So we're going to look into some of that. The second journey that Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu took was towards the east. And the variations in the explanation in the tafasir that you see is literally 180 degrees. Like someone would claim this issue of what that east was and where did he actually reach is a matter of difference of opinion, because it's a historical account. I mean, there is no ahkam that are related to it. So if some mufassir say, oh, he reached to this point of the earth, no problem. The other mufassir say, no, that is not the correct point. He reached to this point of the earth when he talks about the east. It is okay too. It's based on the research, and primarily, not only just the research, it is also based upon the technology and the level of information that was available to them. So the second journey that he took towards the east is mentioned basically from the ayah 89 to 91 in Surah Al-Kahf. And so the second journey, before we go into the second journey, there are some that I mentioned regarding the historical accounts. We discussed last time that there are 2 or 3 personalities that usually the historians basically confuse Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu with other conquerors. in the history. One is the Alexander the Great. They say that Alexander the Great is basically Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala. Now there are three objections that come to defend this, as to why Alexander the Great is not Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The first and foremost objection that we as Muslims have to this account of history, whoever is trying to prove this, is that we all know that Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu was not a monotheist. He was not believing in one God. So he was a polytheist. And Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu, as the Quran states, he was a pious man. And he was the man of Allah. He was the person who remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's who he was. Because his ally was, he was a kind of sahabi of Ibrahim alayhi salam, according to some Mufassirin. Number two, Khidr alayhi salam was his cousin. So, he's coming from a very strong background. And so he was a Muslim. That is our understanding. So one, why Alexander the Great cannot be equated to Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala is because of the fact that the religion was different. Number one. Number two, there are accounts in the history that mention the behavior and the demeanor of Alexander the Great. And in some instances, if you read some of the historical account as to where Alexander the Great went and when he conquered the land, the way he treated some of the people was unjust. And the objective of Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu was to assure the prevalence of justice on the land of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Alexander the Great did not do justice every single time wherever he reached to whichever country. Whereas Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu, his objective and his command was to ensure justice and peace on the land. And the third and the last, which is basically from the anthropology side, is that Alexander the Great did not live a very long life. Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala, from the Islamic history and also from the Judaic history as well, the minimum that you see that he lived was 700 years. That is the account of his life. 700 years he lived. So, if somebody was the companion of Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? And in some, last time I remember one of the brothers was asking, what was the time period that he came? Well, did he came before Musa alayhi salam? Did he came after Isa alayhi salam? Which time period does he fit in? In one of the tafsir it is mentioned that he came between the time period between Musa alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam. That was a time period that he was present. And wallahu alam, what exact time frame he came in, obviously to some extent it is interesting, but beyond that, to go into really depth of it, there's no religious benefit out of it. So we should be looking for what can we get out of the story other than just the nitty-gritty details. So that is a third argument, that he lived around 700 years of age, versus Alexander the Great did not live that long. That is known in the history. So that's that. Then the other personality that Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu is confused with is Cyrus. Cyrus, and the person who actually does that, the historian who confused Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu with this Persian conqueror, Cyrus the Great he's known. He was a Persian, is Herodotus. He's the historian, he's a Greek historian, and he's the one who confuses this Cyrus with Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And again, trying to basically glorify and highlight, oh, look how great the history was, and how great the Persians were, and how great the Romans were, and how great the Greeks were. In order to do that, in order to justify their characters and the strength of their characters, they obviously have no way but to steal it from some of the Islamic characters. So Cyrus is the other one that they claim that Zulqarnain was, but in effect that is not true again, because Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala from our lens is the lens of Quran. So from our lens, he was a Muslim. He was a Muslim. So that is just two personalities that they usually confuse Zulqarnain with. And if you search on the internet, the moment you will write Zulqarnain, the account of Alexander the Great and Cyrus will come up. And you wonder, how is it that all of a sudden, there are only few references to the Quran. The moment you write Zulqarnain, all of a sudden what you will see is Cyrus the Great, Alexander the Great, Roman mythology, Greek, all of that. And you wonder why, shouldn't the Quranic passages and the tafsir should come first when you type in there? So it's really interesting. One other interesting fact remember we talked about Zulqarnain and why he's called the person with, the title itself is called the person with two horns, basically. And there are variations. Some say Zulqarnain means from a good lineage, etc., etc. On a $100, whatever the currency is, on a 100 currency bill of Turkmenistan Central Bank, they have depicted the picture that is there on the $100 whatever currency bill on Turkmenistan currency is Oghuz Khan. And if you look at the picture of Oghuz Khan, you see that he is wearing a helmet that has two horns. So the Turkmenistan people from them are also trying to claim that Oghuz Khan was basically, or some of his lineage was basically Zulqarnain. So everybody, is trying to depict that Zulqarnain was theirs, even the brothers or people from Turkmenistan as well. A little bit of further context before we go into the Eastern journey regarding how did this whole thing come about? Why is Quran? What was the reasoning behind what was the shan al-nuzul of this ayah? What was the reason of revelation? Quraysh, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam announced his prophethood and he was preaching, obviously the Quraysh in Makkah were really disturbed because this was happening, something that they didn't really want it to happen, because he was breaking the norm of the time in Makkah. So they sent some people to Medina. At that time it was called Yathrib. And they sent two people over there. There are different riwayah. One say that Uqba bin Mu'ayt was sent with another person, Nazar bin al-Haris. And these two people were sent by Quraysh to the Jews of Yathrib, to the Jews who were residing in Medina. And it is interesting why the Jews were residing in Medina. You would think, why are Jews residing in Medina? And you see in the seerah that the threats that were faced by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina were two threats primarily. One was the threats of the hypocrites, the munafiqun, and the other was the threat of the Jews who would do a treaty and then would break a treaty, and then do a treaty and then would break a pact with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So those were the two imminent threats at that time. And it's another history as to how did the Jews ended up from Jerusalem, how did they ended up in Medina, and what exactly were they doing in Medina. There's a whole historical context. Why were they in Medina? There's a reason why they were in Medina. So the Quraysh sent these two people to ask the Jews, because the Jews were the people of the book. And so the Quraysh thought that even though they were ignorant people, but they thought that, look, this is what this person, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is claiming, and what he's doing is something that is beyond the normal. So they recognize that there is some extra help going on, meaning there is some divine help, and what he's saying has a connection with God. That's what they understood. So they said, now why not check with Jews, because they're the people of the book, they're learned people, they must know something about this prophecy that some person is going to come and claim prophethood. So that's why they sent two people to Medina. And the Jews, these two messengers, they told Jews what is happening in Makkah, and this man is claiming this and that. And the Jews said, okay, well, we give you 3 questions, okay? You go and ask these 3 questions. And if this person that is claiming to be a prophet, if he answers these 3 questions, then what he's saying is true. That means he is the last messenger. Then believe in him. But if he cannot answer these questions, then do whatever you feel like doing with him, because then he's just a false person. So they come back and then they ask these questions. The first question was about the people of the cave, Kahf, that is mentioned in the Quran. Then the second question was about the man who traveled distances and who reached to the peak of east and the west. And this was Zulqarnain. So this Quranic story came about because the kuffar were testing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam if he is a true prophet or not. That was the context. And when they asked, and the third question was about the ruh, that what do you say about the nafs or the soul, whatever you want to call it. So ruh was the third question. And when they asked this question, the first day, it is mentioned in Tafsir Ibn Kathir as well, and when he asked, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, come tomorrow, I'll let you know, because he was obviously waiting for the wahi. Come tomorrow, I'll tell you. Come tomorrow, I'll tell you. And then Jibreel alayhi salam came, and basically it was a lesson for the ummah that say, Insha'Allah, I will tell you. Say, Insha'Allah, I will tell you. So that when they came the next day, he said, Insha'Allah, I'll tell you tomorrow. The wahi came down, and these verses of the Quran were revealed. So that is how, and that is why this story is mentioned, because it was a test. So that's the context of this, as to why this chapter or these ayahs were. This person, Herodotus, who basically confuses Cyrus with Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he is known to be, in the Greek, from the Greek perspective, he is known to be the father of the history. Because people say that he is the first person who actually wrote a chronological history of mankind. He basically wrote the history of Persia and Greeks and Romans and all of that. But he is known to be the father of history. They have statues of him, and they boast him that he is the father of the history, because he created the history subject, basically, as a method of inquiry. But obviously we know that historical account, Muslims have been keeping the historical accounts since way back. But so that was now one interesting part in this, when the journeys are mentioned in the Quran, and if you read it, after the first journey, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, and he addresses basically Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that when you find these people where you're going, it was in the west. When you find these people in the west, right, it's up to you what you want to do with them. If you want to punish them, if they don't basically, accept Islam or accept the unity of Allah, or if you want to preach them, basically. So the decision-making power was given to Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And he said, I will ask them. That's what he did. When he went to the west, when he found those people who were basically getting the dead fish from the river of life, so-called, he told them that, I am here to establish the law of God, the law of Allah on the land. And so if you accept my invitation to Islam, to believe in one God, I will not harm you. But if you rebel, then I shall fight with you. So the same thing happened when he went to the Eastern journey, that he went there and he invited the people first towards Islam. The lesson to learn here is that war is not, or jihad or war or killing of people is not the default position of Islam. That's not our first course of action, right? attacking people is not our first course of action. Our first course of action is inviting people towards the goodness, is invitation to people. That's our first course of action. And that is what is mentioned in the Quran as well. Where when you meet people, invite them with hikmah. Invite them to Islam with hikmah, with wisdom. So invitation towards Islam is the first course of action. War and jihad and killing people and all of that, that is not the first course of action. And that is what Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu is teaching us as well here. So the eastern journey that he took, when he reached to I'll discuss what is this eastern end of the world, because obviously we understand that there is no end per se, because the world obviously is not a rectangle, so there is no end. But how we are dealing with this end of the east and the end of the west is interesting, and how Mufassirin dealt with it. So when he went to the eastern tip of the world, at the point where he could not go beyond that point. So when we're saying eastern tip, basically it means that from that point onwards, it was all just ocean. And he did not have the means, Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala did not have the means to take all this massive army and take a journey towards in the ocean like that. So that's why he stopped there, basically, number one. Number two, the reason why he stopped at those east and western points is because there was no inhabitation after that. He knew through revelation or through whatever reason, he knew that there is no human being living after these points. That is the end of basically, people habitating the place. So when he reached there, he found a nation, and the first nation that he found, as we know, was the Nasik. It's called the Nasik. And the second nation that he found was it's called Mansik. That is the second nation, which is at the eastern tip, Mansik. And when he found those people, what he saw, first of all, the land, the eastern tip that he was, basically that was a point where the sun comes out. When he saw those people, they did not had any shelter whatsoever. And there are a few reasons for that historians say. Either the land was such, the land was such that they could not build anything on that land. Meaning maybe it was a swamp. So on swamp land, you cannot erect anything. So maybe it was a swamp. That's one hypothetical way of describing it. Now when he saw those people, he saw that these people would, when it was sunrise, when the sun would rise, obviously because they don't have any shelter, and at that point, what they would do is they have dug basically these trenches, these little caves underneath the ground. Now the question also might be that if it was a swamp, how can they dig something? So then maybe it wasn't a swamp. But the thing is that they used to dig in earth and make little kind of caves within the ground, and they would hide to protect themselves from the direct sunlight, because it didn't have any shelter, no tree, no nothing, no roof anywhere. So they would hide in those caves, and when the sun will set, that's when they will come out and they will hunt and fish and whatever not. Here, what is interesting is Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, he mentions this journey briefly, but he mentions it from a different perspective, right? He mentions these journeys, but he takes some spiritual points out of that. He also mentioned, Imam Ghazali also mentions this journey in his books. And when he mentions this journey, according to him, he says that these people, this Mansik people, this tribe, basically, it wasn't caves that they dug. It was actually graves that they have dug in for themselves. So they dug these graves for themselves, and during the day they would lie down in the grave and pretend to remember death. Pretend to remember death. And then in the evening time they would come out, basically, and so because they would feel the heat of the sun in that little pocket that they have created for themselves as graves, and so they would basically practice death. And so Imam Ghazali takes a point out of it. As I said, he looks at it from a very different angle. His angle is not the historical angle. His angle is not the tafsir angle. His angle is the spiritual angle. So he looks at it and he says, this is a reminder for us that Quran is telling us that as Muslims we should be remembering death too often, but we are heedless from it. So we have become heedless and we don't remember death as much. But look at these people, at the time of Zulqarnain, they have actually dug graves, basically, and they would stay in those graves during the day. Now there are other accounts of, past the Sahaba era, past the time period of the Sahaba, past the time period of Tabi'een, during the time period of Tabi'een and Tabi'een, that there are some accounts that are found where there were some extremely pious people who have actually done this. In their homes they have dug a grave for themselves, and they would do a practice session every night. They would sleep in it, they would lay in the grave, and they would ask their wives or somebody to close the top, basically just leave a little bit for the air, and they would lay in it to practice death and to experience death, to remind themselves that this is where they're going. I mean, that's obviously a very, for the lack of a better term, a very extreme way to remember death. But, I mean, these were the people who were extremely pious. They were among the Zahideen. They have just completely left the world out, and they were completely focused on the Akhirah. And the question is that something that, are we doing wrong by not following their examples? No, it's not. This is their level. So let them do what their level demands them to do. We are different people, but the point is that as Muslims and as people, the modern day people as we call ourselves, is still the lack of remembrance of death is an issue. Somebody told me yesterday, he's a trusted friend, and there's no reason why he would lie. So obviously our default understanding that you can believe in him, and he's a very good friend of mine. We were talking about, because his father just passed away. Just passed away. He was a very close friend of mine, and so I was at his place, we were eating, and he told me, he said he just took a trip back to Pakistan because that's where his father died. So he said, I went back, and he said that, things are very different over there now. And I said, really? Like how? He said, I'll give you an example. And I couldn't, for 3 times I denied. I said, no, this cannot happen. This is like crazy stuff. He said, no, this is confirmed. He said, they have created a graveyard, in Pakistan somewhere, in Karachi actually, near the highway. They said they have created a graveyard, and I wouldn't mention which sect of Islam has done that. Forget about that. It's a Muslim graveyard at the end of the day. And what you have over there is that you have they have connected with internet, and for each grave you have a video cam on top of the grave, and it's connected to the internet, and you also have audio capability with that camera. So say, let's suppose my father passed away, so I bury him over there, and now every Thursday I log onto my internet account, and I log on, and that camera is connected like there's home cameras, like CCTV cameras, And remotely, I can access the grave, basically, not inside, but from the top. So I can see the grave of my dad. And I can, whatever I recite, Fatiha or whatever, it will be relayed onto the grave, and that's the way to do Fatiha. I mean, human mind is just crazy in that sense. Who would imagine that you would create something like this? Don't ask me the fiqh ruling on that. Okay, well, is it allowed or not? That's not the point. The point is that the whole point to go to the graveyard was to look at those ruins and to remind ourselves of the dead. So anyway, so he went to this part, and these people were actually barbarous people. When he went to and he saw the Mansik people, they were very, very barbarous people. They would like basically kill anything and everything that would come in their way. So he invited them to Islam. It is mentioned that not only they were barbarous, like the picture that we have in our heads for indigenous people in the Amazons, basically, that's the kind of people he encountered. Bare minimum clothing, people like very, very basically bare bones structure. So those were the kinds of people he encountered, and he invited them to Islam. And it is mentioned that some of them did fight, but then they wanted to fight. But when they saw the amount of people that Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu had, and the army and the weaponry, and they just said, like, forget about it. We just submit to Islam. Whatever you say, we believe in it. So that was the nation of the East. Now, here the question is, and this is very interesting, what was that region? Because the Quran mentions he reached to a point where the sun rises the sun rises, that's the point from where the sun rises, right? And from the west it says that that's the point where the sun sets. So what was this eastern part? Very interesting and kind of completely contradictory accounts on this. One is, according to one research of a Mufassir, he says that this was the part of basically the region which is in modern time the Pakistan region, the region of Makran. It's a little corner in the Pakistan, Makran. And that region is the region where he went as far as he could go. That was the eastern tip. Because that basically combines with Iran. So they say that he reached all the way to Iran, right? And he basically just reached towards the mountains of Makran, and that was it. So that's one definition of what that east was. And some say that it was not Makran, he actually did cross Makran as well, basically the Pakistan region. But that's just one account. The other account is they say that the point that he reached was in Antarctica. And in Antarctica, there's a point where that's the point that he reached. Because when one of the accounts, when they show the journey of Zulqarnain, the tribe, because remember, when the Mufassirin talk about this issue in the Quran, in the Tafasir, they are using old maps. They are not using current modern day maps. So our understanding of basically eastern tip or western tip is different than their understanding. The regions that they are looking at is different regions. Because over time, the earth shifts. And we all know that initially, basically, Africa and Egypt were combined. And then later on, because of the shifting, this kind of broke off to an extent. So the geographical scenario was different at that time. When we say continent of Africa, that was not the case at that time. There was different, things were patched up together. They were not as bifurcated, but as the plates of the earth shift, and we all know that the map has changed over time. And actually you can go in history in the Museum of Science in Houston, they have a little display, and it's a big kind of animated TV, and what you can do is it tells you the history of the world map. So you can scroll, right? So you can scroll on the left, and you would see how the map of the world was, and as you scroll on the right, it will tell you, there's a middle point, which is this is the current map, and if you roll to the right, it will tell you how the map will shift in the future. What areas are going to get combined, what mountains are going to get segregated, and you can actually see that. It's very interesting. So that's one that Makran was there. The other is Antarctica. That's the other tafsir, but that's the eastern tip. Now, when today you look at it, the easternmost point, which we consider easternmost, how do we define easternmost? The place where the sun rises the first, right? That would be the easternmost point. The place where the sun rises the first. If you look at the map with the longitude and latitude lines of the world, there is a line which we call the international date line, which is right in the middle, basically. And if you are on this side of the international date line, basically, then you're either experiencing day or night. And the other side is experiencing the other opposite of it. So the international date line here is basically the Samoan island, the Samoa and the Fiji, all of that. And on this side of the international date line is New Zealand. And today, if you look at it, the easternmost point, meaning the place where the sun rises the first, is in New Zealand. And we all know that New Zealand has indigenous people as well. Now, did he reach to New Zealand? Was it New Zealand? I don't know. But if from today's perspective, if you look at it, the easternmost point is New Zealand, because that's where in the entire earth, if somebody asks you where does the sun rises the first, is New Zealand. And where does the sun sets the last is the Samoan island. So that's just two extreme points which are on the either side of the international date line. If you are here, then you are in a different date. If you are on that side, you are on the different date, basically. So that was just a little description as to what this eastern point and western point means. The confusion in history regarding Zulqarnain, confusing him with either Alexander the Great or Cyrus, and why this confusion happens, and then the eastern journey, and the issue of what that region was, that's eastern or western tip. When it comes to the next journey, which has the most, I would say, meat in it, in a sense, it has a lot of description, the Gog and Magog, Yajuj Majuj issue, who they were, how did they, what happened to them, and how do they relate to the end of the world? What is going to happen to them in the end of the world? What are they going to do? Obviously, it's kind of interrelated. So that's the next part. When it comes to their region, which is the southernmost tip of the world, to some extent, the scholars have sort of a consensual research regarding the location. But still, it's just based on research. We just don't know. There's no accurate description of what that region was. And even if there is, the names and the regions are all different than what it is today. So anyway, so that was the eastern journey. Mansik was the nation. These people didn't have any shelter, and Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala conquered them as well. That was the easternmost point on the earth at that time. Inshallah, next week we will do the southern journey, which is the last journey of Zulqarnain radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in which the issue of Gog and Magog comes in, who these people are. And there is very interesting, one researcher did, he went to details about who actually is Gog and Magog, their height, their weight and height, and all the other details about them. And he has actually linked Gog and Magog, their lineage, with one of the nations that exist today. It's very interesting the way they derive the meaning of it. Inshallah, so we'll discuss that, especially in terms of the akhirah, what will happen to Gog and Magog when near the end of the world, and how will they come, what they will do, and how they will die. Because their death is something that you probably have not heard a lot of times. You might have heard about they're going to come, they're very barbarous people and all of that, but how are they going to die is very interesting. And what will happen to them after their death is an interesting account. Inshallah, we'll try and cover it next. You asked the question?
Yeah, before that question, okay, in the west he found the river of life.
Yes.
In the east he found what?
Nothing. There is no specific thing that he found in the east. It was just this tribe and that's it.
Okay. Now, in your last, you said there were 4 people that Allah gave that